I'm going to rest that topic for now, and we'll revisit it at a future show. And let's move on to slide 103. Slide 103, again, this whole section is about why do we have certain institutions and certain control systems that we have today. Where were their origins in our ancient past? And, you know, we've already talked about the origins of religion. And we've just kind of wrapped up talking about the origins of money. We've talked about the origins of occultism and dark occultism and secret society networks, etc. What about the origin of government and kingship? Okay, where did that come from? And again, in the story of that we had outlined in the story of our past in a previous show dealing with this cosmic abandonment presentation, which, of course, you could always go back into the archives and check all that out. You know, that's several shows back now. This is podcast number 166 this evening, for those who might be listening via podcast. You know, you could go back and, you know, hear the story about how these beings essentially put pharaohs and kings, priest kings, into place, representing their authority over humanity, okay, as the gods, the demigods. Okay, the gods interbred with humanity. And once again, you know, please recognize I'm saying gods with a small g in double quotes, wrapping it in double quotes. I don't think that they're real gods, okay? And I think it's very important for me to reiterate that, because when people hear me telling this story, they always go back, well, do you see these beings as gods? I still get emails. You know, if people saw the emails I get by people hearing snippets of what I say without hearing it in full context of the past shows, you'd be surprised at how many people do not understand what I'm saying. They misinterpret it because they want to listen for 5 minutes and think they understand what I'm saying. That's why I tell you have to go back and listen to all the podcasts from number 1. But if you just want to go back and listen to the stuff on cosmic abandonment, I think I made it abundantly clear, almost to the point of nausea, that I don't think these were real gods. But that's what they called themselves, you know, to get other people to follow them and obey their commands, and that's how other people saw them, because of their advanced technology being sort of indistinguishable from the supernatural from their perspective. So they interbred with humanity, as we saw in the story of our past, and they essentially put some of their offspring, their hybrid offspring, which was a combination between themselves and humanity, into positions of power. I simply refer to these beings as the demigods because they were partial quote-unquote gods and partial human, had human characteristics and traits as well. So these beings that they put into positions of power were hybrids, and they didn't have as long of lifespans as them, but certainly longer than regular human beings. And they had a combination of an appearance. Their appearance was more similar to the gods. Of course, their genetics was more similar to the gods, but it had human genetic material in it as well, of course. And so humans were more readily willing to accept their commands, fall in line under them, accept them as their rulers, because they weren't really fully human. They were part Anunnaki, the name that the Sumerians ascribed to these beings. They were part, you know, full quote-unquote God, and they were part human. The Bible refers to these beings, these hybrid beings, as Nephilim, meaning those who fell. A simple translation from the Hebrew verb nafal, which means to fall. It's actually where we really get the English word fall, comes down to us from nafal. So they were the fallen ones, and people interpret this meaning as fallen angels. Yeah, well, if you see the original quote-unquote gods as being angels from the sky, these were the beings that couldn't go back to their planet after their mission was over because they were hybrids, and that was forbidden by their planet's rules. So yeah, they were fallen to the earth. They had to stay here. And they were put into the chief positions of power and, quote, authority in our world because they had more of the, quote, gods' genetics within them. And if you just think about that, it makes perfect sense when you think of bloodline being the reason that kingship is passed down. It's not passed down through ability. It's not passed down through righteousness. It's not passed down through traits of the individual. It's passed down through blood, through kinship, through who was your father, who was your son, who was your mother, who was your daughter. You know, it's about genetics. It's about blood transference from one, group of people to another, and therefore handing so-called authority, perceived authority, down to those future generations. So why would people think that there would be such a thing as divine right of kings connected to blood if there wasn't something physical to this story, if there wasn't some kind of physical, tangible reason that the inherent ability to rule was perceived in this way because these beings actually came from another species of beings? We'll pick this up on the other side, folks. Stay with us. Why do we have the social structures and institutions that we have? What are their origins? Where did they come from? Why did people start believing the things, the ridiculous, erroneous notions, the bad thought processes, the absolutely false religious beliefs that they have come to? And where did that all come from? What was the origin of all that bad, wrong thinking? Did it have some sort of a physical, historical origin in the ancient past? I believe that it did. And the whole notion of kingship and the divine right to rule, and that having to do with bloodline lineage, comes directly out of the story of our past, of human origins, of these ancient watcher beings or fallen angel type beings. People have called them many different things. They've called them the gods. They've called them the watchers. They've called them the fallen angels or simply angels. They've called them the ones who came down, the ones who fell. Many, many different names. In the modern day, we refer to them as possibly extraterrestrial beings or even extra-dimensional beings. Who knows? Again, whatever the nature of these beings are, they came here and essentially set up a kingdom for themselves as gods to rule over. At least a faction of them did. I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush and say every single being felt that way, but certainly a large enough faction of them wanted to do that. And they positioned themselves as our gods because they were our creators genetically. And they looked at it like, since they made us, they have a right to do with us as they will, and we have to listen to them. They are our quote-unquote cosmic parents. We are their cosmic stewards, and we don't have a right for self-determination. We don't have a right to essentially own ourselves. And so they created kingship, which was the beginnings of government on this planet. It was the first governments, essentially. And again, they put the people, the demigods, into these positions of power and authority because they didn't really want to do that work themselves. They didn't want to do the administrative tasks of running daily life here on this planet themselves. Oh no, they were too lofty and otherworldly and busy to do that. They had other goals and aspirations. They put their hybridized prodigy into that role, and set them up as the king or the priest king or pharaoh that had to be worshipped and listened to and obeyed without question. This is the origin of royalty. This is the origin of kingship, which eventually began over time because too many people began to see it as the absolute farce that it is. It slowly degenerated over many, many millennia into the notion of government and representational government. Also equally as complete bunk illusions as, this original form of government, which was called kingship. or royalty. And, it's all been a complete farce, a complete fantasy, a complete illusion, something that doesn't exist in nature, something that has no validity to it, something that has no, absolutely not one shred of legitimacy whatsoever. And, people insist that anything has changed, because now we have governments that are representative of people, of the people's wishes. Really, 95% of the American people don't want us involved in a lot of the foreign entanglements that we are right now, but we're still there. Over 95% of the American people didn't want bailouts of these super mega banks, but that happened anyway, didn't it? The vast majority of people aren't for any gun control measures whatsoever, at least in this country. Thank God. And yet you're still seeing the encroachment of gun control happening constantly, trying to continuously sneak it in at every opportunity in turn by our so-called representatives. And that's why the whole idea of representative government in general is a huge farce and an illusion. Because it presumes that there is authority over other people at all. And anybody can be, quote, represented. There's only one authority that exists over any human beings. It's called natural law. It's called the laws of morality that are in place in the universe, put in place by the real God of creation. Period. God with a capital G, and you might as well capitalize the O and the D too. Because I'm not talking about lowercase God with double quotes around it like these completely imbalanced creatures who came here and did the things that they did to this planet and us did. Has nothing to do with the God of creation. They would claim to usurp the role of that force in nature. You don't even have to look at it as a being if you have a problem with the word God. Look at it as a force, an underlying force of organization and intelligence present in nature. I'm perfectly comfortable with the word God, but if somebody else isn't, hey, look at it however you want. Whatever makes you feel comfortable. But if you think mankind is the highest power in creation, and we get to make up the difference between right and wrong, you think just like your owners do. That's exactly how they think. We're the highest power in creation. We get to rule over these beings. We get to make up the difference between right and wrong. Who can tell us otherwise? Forget about what's really, truly right or wrong. No, forget those laws that exist in nature. We don't want to know about that. We want to ignore that. We want to believe that doesn't exist. And we wonder why we're still in a prison cell. As if people even need to ask that question. Because they never make the connection. See, that's how people never make that karmic connection. That whether our actions in our alignment with right or wrong behavior determines whether we are free or not. No, that connection is never made in people's cognitive association. Because most people don't have cognitive association. They've been too dumbed down and conditioned and brainwashed and mind-controlled to ever develop that cognitive associative thinking. God forbid. God forbid, folks, that might actually require effort and time and willpower and reading and taking in information from an eclectic variety of sources and then filtering it and thinking about it and processing it, making up your own mind about it. Can't have that. Population wants nothing whatsoever to do with that. Let's hit the strip bar. Let's go to the game. Pass me a beer. That's all. The origin of kingship, the origin of government, the origin of the quote-unquote divine right to rule, the origin of passing on the continuance of this rulership through bloodline, all having to do with the quote-unquote gods of the ancient world who had come here in search of whatever resources they wished to procure from this planet, created a quote-unquote species of primitive workers, as they referred to us, and essentially then decided, well, these are our quote-unquote cosmic children. We're going to rule over them as their parents and essentially create a society in which we are worshipped as God. And that's essentially what they did for tens of thousands of years. And it's still going on today. Nothing has changed. You know, this whole idea of kingship was what was known as the Old World Order. It's what we call it today because it's what went on thousands, tens of thousands of years back. And I'm moving on to slide number 104 to illustrate this point, this concept. The Old World Order was kingship. It was, you know, society being ruled by a priest, a king, or some type of combination of the two, of those two dynamics, a religious leader or a political leader. And that authority being given to him by God, quote unquote, directly. He is divinely appointed. See, the gods put him in that position of power because of his blood. Therefore, his blood is different than other people's blood. And in this case, it was. That's not to say he should have any right to rule over other people, but that is why probably so many people went along with it. You know, because they looked at these beings as somehow supernatural entities in their limited awareness and perspective of what they really were. They certainly had much more advanced technology and could perform feats that seemed like supernatural or magical feats to them. So they were gods in their eyes. And they appointed a ruler in their stead, you know, who would basically do their bidding and pass their commands down onto the people in this hierarchical system that they would have created. This was called simply kingship, or what I label it here, the concept of authority vested in one being. And of course I write the word authority in quotes because it's a total illusion. It's completely illegitimate. There is zero legitimacy to it. Never had any legitimacy. There isn't any now, and there never will be any legitimacy to a king. There's no such thing as a king who has the actual right in nature to rule over other people. If there is anybody left on this planet who actually believes that, they're so mentally ill that I feel absolutely sorry for them, how broken their brain is. You know, and if anybody thinks that, they're under deeper mind control than I am ever capable of helping anyone to come out of. But then again, so many people still actually believe in this concept indirectly, which we'll get to. The concept of authority vested in one is, the definition of this whole concept is, a system that is based entirely in violence, because what it's really based on is coercion. It doesn't make a difference whether the ruler is saying something to the people that they don't want or don't want to do. In this system, the people are perceived as having some kind of a moral obligation to obey the master's wishes. Okay? To obey the king's wishes. And he is claiming to have a moral right to rule over them and to give them, issue them commands. So this system is totally based in coercion right from Jump Street, right from the get-go. Okay? It's based in violence as such. And it's built upon the erroneous, which means absolutely false, fake. You know, somebody who believes in it falsely and is wrong for doing so, therefore they are in error. That's where the word erroneous, what erroneous means. The erroneous and dogmatic, meaning it's unchallenged, unwavering belief. It's just hammered into somebody's mind from the time that they're young, and then they believe in it unquestioningly. Their dogmatic belief, which these two things constitute a religion. An incorrect and dogmatic belief system is religion, which is what the belief in the legitimacy of kingship always has been. It is a religion. Most people will not have ever heard something, you know, basically said like that, that kingship is a religion. Authority in general is a religion. Okay, it's a religion, and the main belief is that one person is the master who possesses a moral right to issue commands to the whole body of his population, and all others in that population are his subjects. They are subjected to his wishes, his whims, his commands, and they have a moral obligation to obey the commands that are set by that master. Now, just think about that whole concept. Is that not what kingship is and was? Yeah, that's exactly what kingship was. And in certain places in the world, sadly, there still exists political kings. It's always been a religion that's based in a belief that isn't true. It's based in a belief that is erroneous, that is only a claim made by one individual, that I'm God on the earth, you have to do what I say, and, you know, you have some kind of a moral obligation to obey me. And if you don't, I'll do coercion and violence to you through other people that I've gotten to believe this absolute nonsense bunk. And I'll have them do violence unto you. Of course I won't soil my hands myself, because, you know, one, I couldn't, because I'm not big and bad enough to do that anyway. I have to have a cult that I've built based on complete false religion, you know, and my idiot cult followers who don't think for themselves and just want to listen to what they're told to do and follow orders, they'll do all that violence to you. I'll never touch you. I'll never lay a hand on you, you know. But my moronic cult followers, oh, they'll go and do whatever I tell them to do. And folks, let me tell you something. I was talking with a friend about this week. This is why you'll never really hear me talk really, really angrily about the masters of this world. I don't talk about the people who currently rule the world in a real super nasty way. I call them psychopaths because that's what they are. They're psychopathic people. They're like animals who do not have the capacity to actually feel. That's not really saying something angrily about them or something that's really emotionally charged. If you really think about all my past comments about the, quote, ruling class, it's very sort of cold and dispassionate, okay? It's like I'm just explaining their nature. I likened it to this when I talked with another person about this, okay? I likened it to, would you get super emotionally charged and try to talk to or out against a tiger that had just ripped through a village and eaten a child or something like that? You know, if you lived, let's say, in a tribal culture in Africa and a tiger comes ripping through the village and eats a child, you'd be angry at the event, at what took place. You'd be heartbroken and you know, possibly really, you know, really emotionally in upheaval over that event taking place. But what I'm asking you is, would you actually try to like get up in the face of the tiger and get all crazy emotional and like be yelling things to the tiger? You might go get a high-powered rifle and put a bullet through the tiger's head and be done with it. And that still isn't going to take the hurt away of a child being killed. But the whole point is, that's an animal doing what an animal does if it's desperate and hungry. You know, to get super upset and mad and angry at that tiger, you know, is nonsensical. It doesn't even make any sense, because that's just what a tiger may do in that instance. You know? Well, that's the same thing as the ruling class. I never get really angry with them. They're animals who act the way an animal acts. What on earth is happening here on Republic Broadcasting? I'm your host, Mark Passio. What I do get very emotionally charged when I talk about is order followers, because these are the people that actually carry out the wishes for these lunatic psychopaths. You know, they're the ones who are basically at the behest of these animals and doing their bidding for them. An animal is just what it is. It's their very nature. A primary psychopath cannot act any other way than how it acts. It's a genetic anomaly, a degenerative genetic condition that is a result, more likely than not, of the genetic modification that these beings did to us in the distant past, creating this condition, as we talked about weeks ago. But that just is how they are. So I don't really harbor that much ill will against them. I disagree with what they do. I think that they really shouldn't be doing what they're doing, but that doesn't mean that that's going to make it so, that's just going to magically make it so. They're going to continue to act the way that they act because that's all they know and that's all they are. And they're not capable of becoming any more than that. Something is cut off from them, you know? You know, I liken it to, you know, people sit there thinking that somehow they could regrow their capacity to feel. That's not what primary psychopathy is. And people don't want to admit or acknowledge this condition exists in the world. You know, it's just like an amputation. You know, you're not going to say to a person who doesn't have hands, you know, I'm going to teach you how to have a lot of dexterity with sculpting, you know. You're not going to be a sculptor with your hands, at least, okay? Sculpt with your feet or your tongue, but it's not going to happen with hands that you don't have. If you were born with some kind of a genetic dysfunction or condition where you were born without hands or arms, it's not there. The capacity's not there. It's like you're going to try to teach mathematics to a cow. The capacity's not there. They're not going to be able to ever grasp algebra or calculus or, you know, probability and statistics. It isn't going to happen. It's the same thing with a psychopath. A psychopath's not going to feel. It's not going to have, you know, emotional repercussions for their behavior. You know, they're incapable of that. So why get all emotionally charged, you know, talking out against someone like that? That's a program that's running. That's a machine of some kind. That's a flesh robot. You know, that's not even an actual being that has true free will. That's some broken entity that is, you know, operating like an automaton robot and just doing what it does like a wind-up doll. Who does have actual free will are the people who they get to follow them and do their bidding for them. Those people are actually abdicating and trying to hand over their free will responsibility to choose right from wrong for themselves to someone else. And who they're giving it to is a psychopath. Now that I could get emotionally charged about, because they're the ones who are making this world a prison. They are the cause. They are the ones who are actually doing it. And if you don't understand that yet, you're totally asleep. You're completely asleep. If you have any respect for police, if you have any respect for military, if you have any respect for any people whose job it is to follow somebody else's orders, you are asleep. You don't know the first thing about truth. You don't know the first thing about enlightenment at all. At all. Blanket statement. Blanket statement. 100% that way all the time. Eternally. I don't care who it offends, because I'm not here to be liked or play a popularity contest. I'm here to tell the harsh, hardcore, uncomfortable truth that needs to be understood and integrated for this species to come out of its slavery. So, speaking of that word, let's move on to slide number 105. Because if you think that the concept of authority vested in one person as a king, okay, is anything other than slavery, you are also completely unconscious. You don't know what the truth about this reality is. You don't understand that that's completely inherently illegitimate. There is no legitimacy to the concept of kingship. The old world order, the concept of a king ruling everybody else because some kind of imaginary authority is vested in him. Let's call it what it really is without euphemizing it, without applying a euphemism, which is a word to make a concept sound better than it really is. That's all a euphemism ever is. It's the definition of what a euphemism is. Let's stop applying a euphemism and calling this kingship or even rulership. This is called slavery if we're being honest with ourselves. If we're being honest with ourselves, which most people aren't. They want to lie, they want to justify, they want to give excuses for order followers who keep slavery in place. You know? Because they don't want to admit that they've been wrong about something they've formerly believed. That is their religion. Their religion. moving on to slide number 106. So my question at this point in the presentation becomes, what has changed? Has anything since the days of the quote-unquote old world order and kingship changed? And again, what I want people to understand, even when I use the word old world order, okay, put order, I really should in these slides have wrapped order in double quotation marks. Okay? I do that now on my more modern stuff, my more recent stuff. Okay? It wasn't order. This was nothing that resembled actual order. It was total and pure chaos, because slavery is chaos. If the condition was slavery, it was chaos. People have to understand that. You could have slavery run by coercion, where all of the slaves are well kept, well fed, well cared for, but they're still slaves, and that condition is not orderly. Doesn't make a difference if nobody kills anybody, if nobody does anything, just unexpected, or, in some way that people wouldn't know how to react. It wouldn't make a difference how seemingly chaotic orderly behavior was in that situation. It would still be chaos. Slavery is chaos. Okay? Period. All the time. That's why people think through harshly or directly controlling somebody else, you could somehow create a state of order. It's not possible. It can't be done. They are antitheses of each other. Those two states are the direct polar opposite antitheses of each other. Control and order. The only kind of control that could ever bring out order is self-control. That can ever bring about order is self-control. Meaning you're choosing, according to your own free will decision-making processes, to act within the boundaries of right under natural law. By your own control of your own behavior. That's the only kind of control that can ever bring about order. The external control of other people can never bring about order. So, the concept of government, has anything changed since the days of the, quote, old world, quote, order concept of kingship? Has anything really changed in the modern world? Do we have the same condition? Of course we do. It's the same exact thing, except now the so-called, quote, unquote, authority is distributed over a group of people. This is where the whole concept of government came from. From these beings having been put in their positions of power in the world as the kings of the old world, of the ancient world. And now, since people started to question the inherent legitimacy of a king, as having legitimacy to rule over a whole population of people, well, the powers that be, the bloodline, progeny of these ancient bloodlines, which is what the people in the real high-ranking positions of power always have been, decided they had to go more covert and distribute the alleged authority, the claim of authority, over a wider body of people and take more people into that fold. And so we have a euphemized term kingship or rulership, and how nothing really has changed except that the concept of government that comes down to us in the modern world is just a distributing of the alleged claim of authority. Instead of it being vested in one person, it comes into a group of people. So slide 107, really what you have to be under, as I said, to believe in the legitimacy of any kind of authority is mind control. And it's very interesting to note that the actual word government literally means mind control when we break it down into its etymological component roots. The verb governare in Latin, which in classical Latin was, of course, rendered with a B, gubernare, because there was no V in classical Latin, and the V comes through later phonetic drift and a phonetic morphing and change into other languages. The verb gubernare in Latin, where we get the term gubernatorial, meaning related to a governor, means to control. And the Latin noun mens mentis, which is where the second part of the word government meant, any English word that ends in ment comes from, is mind. And yes, that is the actual derivation, the etymology. I've been through this a million times ad nauseum with people. Mens mentis is the second part of the word government. It's where it came from etymologically. It's where any word that ends in ment, meaning the state of or the condition of, comes from, because for any state or condition in the actual reality, the manifested reality that we live in to come about, the idea or concept of that thing has to first exist in mind, of that thing, that state, or that condition. So this is according to the principle of mentalism, that ultimately everything is mind and everything flows from mind. There had to be an idea or an archetype first, and then from there, then you brought that into physical manifestation, or the condition into physical manifestation, the object or the condition. So that is why the people who originated and put together the English language over time chose the Latin word ment, meaning mind, to mean the state of or the condition of. The word government simply means mind control. It always has meant mind control. It does now. It always will. That is what government is. To believe in it is mind control. You have to be under mind control to believe that there is authority vested in man, period. That's all it really comes down to, and government is the quote new world quote order. Again, really, if we move forward to slide number 108, this concept of a new world order based in government and refining itself to a point where there is world government, one unchallenged, unquestioning rulership, okay? They're really trying to go back to the old world order of kingship, where instead of a king, it will be the people of the party who act as the king. That's all. It'll just be vested in a slightly larger group of people instead of in one. So the concept of the New World Order is neither new or orderly. That's another thing, I should have corrected this slide and put new in quotes and order in quotes, because it's not new. It's something that's the same as what was going on in the old world, in the ancient world, and it can never bring order because it's based in violence and control. The concept of government itself is authority, quote-unquote, authority vested in a group. This system is entirely based in violence through coercion and built upon the erroneous and dogmatic belief or religion that a certain group of people are masters who possess the moral right to issue commands, while all others are subjects who have the moral obligation to obey the commands of the master. On slide number 109, I just reiterate that this is slavery. It's the same concept as what was practiced in the ancient world through kingship. So since kingship was a euphemism for slavery and government is the exact same thing, except the so-called authority, the claimed authority, is distributed among more people instead of one, it is also slavery. It is the exact same thing. So the answer to the question of what has changed in probably over 200,000 years or more lies on slide number 110. Absolutely nothing has changed. We were under slavery then, we're under slavery now. Only the names have changed. Instead of kingship, they call it government. Instead of slavery ruled by one being, it's now a form of slavery ruled by multiple beings, by a few, comparatively when you compare it with the totality of the population, a tiny, tiny percent. That's what the New World Order is, slavery. And it's no different than what the Old World Order was. It's the same in concept. And this is just what they want to get back to, is it having open rulership out in the open dictatorship. That's the goal of all governments, to get back to the whole concept of these beings ruling over us as our gods. Because again, their mentality comes from this abandonment mentality, as we're going to talk about next week. We went into the whole thing, what makes an order follower? Ultimately, an order follower always has abandonment issues. They want mommy and they want daddy. They don't want to grow up. They don't want to be on their own. They don't want to actually think for themselves. They want somebody else calling the shots and telling them what to do, like a parent. They just want to act without thought. You know, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Because that's the, quote, law. Because a group of people in suits said so. Not because it's right or wrong, no. They couldn't give a damn about what's right or wrong, order followers. You know, and I hear people on other alternative radio shows, and I have to laugh hysterically saying, I don't think the police would follow orders to do anything horrible to the American public or the people they say that they're sworn to protect. I don't think the military would ever follow their orders and turn their weapons against the American public. People who think like that are so naive. You don't think the military or police would turn against the American public? I mean, you gotta be a joking, imbecilic child to think that way. And call it an ad hominem attack. I don't care what you call it. Call it whatever the hell you want to call it. If you don't think the military have already turned against the people and the police have already turned against the people, you're an asleep joke yourself. You don't know what's going on. You can't see what's already taken place in this world, in this country. So, folks, I'm going to go, that's all the slides I'm going to cover for today. We're going to get into the psychological dynamics that underlie order followers and underlie people who want Big Daddy and Big Mommy around all the time, who don't want to grow up and be true human beings. We're going to go into all their psychological dynamics next week and talk about what really makes them tick in their completely undeveloped brains. They're the people I have an emotional problem with, okay? Not the elite psychopaths, the so-called elitist psychopaths. They're just animals doing what they do. That's all. You know? And they're a tiny, 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 tiny portion of the whole body of this species we call humanity. That would be completely negated if we wouldn't have order followers that were so ready to jump to give away their free will to somebody else. They're the real problem. And the people who ideologically support violence, which is what we're going to get into next week.